So in the Hmong language, there are many dialects. There's the Hmong Do, which is white. There's the Hmong Dua, which means green, and that's actually the one I speak. And there's also the one called Hmong Klu, which is black. And there's also a mixture of languages between Hmong and other languages, depending on like where the Hmong people are at. So like in China, there's like the Hmong Chinese who speak kind of like a different Hmong dialect, and there's also ones in Vietnamese or Vietnam, I should say, who speak like a Hmong Vietnamese mixture, and so it's very difficult to understand like those. But for the Hmong Do and Hmong Dua, they're very similar. There's similarities between all of them, but the Hmong Do and Hmong Dua has the most similarities. Um, but for this video, we'll focus on the Hmong Do and Hmong Dua just because it's very similar and it's the one that's most used. Um, yeah, so you can basically have a conversation using these two dialects. So, for example, one person who speaks Hmong Do, which is white, can easily speak to somebody who's speaking Hmong Dua, which is green, and they can have a conversation. There's a few words here and there which is that's different. It's pronounced different or said differently, but for the most part, you can understand and yeah, understand what each other is saying based on what the word sounds like and what it sounds like you're saying. Um, so the if you put percentages, the Hmong Do, which is the white, it's about 60% of the Hmong population who speak that, and then the Hmong Dua is about 40%. Those aren't the exact numbers, but that's just from like the eyes test or the ears test. You can kind of assume that. But even though it's really close, the Hmong Do is pretty dominant in that all like songs or music or poetry or like writing and reading, it's all done in Hmong Do or the white dialect. Um, so for example, if you're translating from English to Hmong, you're gonna translate into the white dialect. And so for me, growing up speaking the green dialect, um, I was always exposed to the white dialect from like music and from movies and stuff like that. So it's easy for me to understand the white dialect, but for someone who speaks white, it's very difficult for them to understand the green dialect because it is a little different. Um, but some of the examples, uh, yeah. So there's some examples for like words that mean the same thing but are said differently. So for example, water, like the example we used in the first video, water in the white dialect is date, and then water for the green dialect, the dialect I speak, is gle. So when you use it in a sentence like "Kapoho the green dialect, that means do you want to drink water, and the white dialect is "Kapoho date." So it means the same thing, but if you notice, "Kapoho" is do you want to drink, or that's pronounced the same way. It's just the last, the water. Date, it's a little different, and that's one example. Another example would just be in the name itself, the white dialect name. So for someone who speaks the white dialect and they say they speak the white dialect, they would say um, Mong Do, Mong Do, yeah, for the white dialect, Mong Do. But if you speak the green dialect and you're talking about the white dialect, you would say Mong Klo. So the white dialect says Do, and then the green dialect says Klo. So Do and Klo both means white, but they're pronounced differently in the different dialects. And then there's other words that are said completely differently, but they mean the same thing. So for example, the word sit, the white dialect, the Hmong Do dialect, would actually say zhao, so that means sit. Whereas the green dialect, when we say sit, we say yakocho. Yakocho is sit, but it means the same thing. It's just said completely different. So like that's one of the examples that kind of makes it confusing when you're speaking to somebody from the other dialect, because words like that, yeah, don't really make sense. Um, some other words that it's actually pronounced the exact same way but means like different. So there's words like that. For example, the word lu, which means to come. So in the green dialect, the one that I speak, when you say lu, you mean you. It means that to come here, like straight here. Whereas in the white dialect, lu means like to come around. Um, to say in the white dialect, to say to come straight here, you actually say law. So law means come straight here in the white dialect, and then lu means come straight here in the green dialect. But when you say lu in the white dialect, it means to come around. So it's the same word, lu, but it means differently in both. So most, like I said, most of the words in the white and the green dialect are the exact same. You can basically understand each other. It's almost like think of it as English and British, so where basically besides the accent, all the words mean the same, but they have a few words here and there that to English it makes no sense, or to Americans it makes no sense, and then to like the Britons it's basically common knowledge to them. So there's very subtle differences. Yeah, so words that sound different but mean the same, and then there's words that are completely different, like they don't relate at all, but they mean the exact same thing. And there's words that are said the same way but have completely different meaning. So those are some of the examples of like the differences between the green and the white dialect.